The developer, a man in a crisp suit that looked out of place on my dusty porch, cleared his throat and looked at my daughter-in-law, his expression a mixture of confusion and annoyance. "There seems to be a problem with the title search. Victoria," he said, tapping a thick folder of documents. "The final deed transfer. It was never signed. As far as the county is concerned, this land still belongs solely to Lillian Peterson." "Hi, everyone. I'm Grandma Lillian. My name is Lillian Peterson. I'm 81 years old, and I'm speaking to you from the front porch of Blackwood Farm, here in the rolling hills of Iowa. My family has worked this land for over 100 years, and this is the story of how I almost lost it. It's a story I've held in my heart like a smooth, cold stone for the last 3 years. A story about a betrayal so quiet and so cleverly disguised as love that I almost didn't see it coming. My own sister thinks my son, Samuel, and his wife simply moved back to the city because farm life wasn't for them. She doesn't know the truth. She doesn't know they tried to sell my heritage, my husband's legacy, right out from under me. They thought I was a simple, old-fashioned farm woman who wouldn't understand the complex legal papers they put in front of me. They thought my hands were good for pulling weeds, but too clumsy to hold a pen with any real power. They were wrong. This is the story of a single, unsigned piece of paper. It's the story of how I used their own arrogance against them, and how the quiet, simple old woman they tried to discard ended up holding all the cards. Before I begin, I would be so grateful for your company on this journey. Please, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support is a great comfort, and it gives me the strength to finally tell this story of the quietest, most important battle of my life. To understand the fight for this land, you have to understand the land itself. My story doesn't begin with legal documents and deceit. It begins with the smell of rich soil after a rainstorm and the love of a good, strong man. My life truly began in 1962 when I married Frank Peterson. Frank was this land, and this land was him. He was a third-generation farmer, a man whose hands were as tough and as capable as the roots of the old oak tree on the hill. He wasn't a man for fancy words, my Frank. His promises weren't spoken, they were built. He built the barn with his own hands. He built the addition on this farmhouse for our children. He built a life for us through sheer force of will, through sweat, and through a deep, unshakable honor. "Lily," he used to say, "you don't own the land. You borrow it from your children. Your job is to leave it better than you found it." That was his creed. Our life was a simple rhythm, dictated by the seasons. The hard work of planting in the spring, the long, hot days of summer, the satisfaction of the harvest in the fall, and the quiet, restful peace of winter. We weren't rich. We were farmers. But our wealth was in the sunsets over the cornfields, the taste of the food we grew ourselves, the solid, comforting presence of each other at the end of a long day. We had 3 children, our 2 older girls, who grew up and moved to the city, and our youngest, our son, Samuel. Oh, my Samuel. He was born in 1975, a surprise and a delight. But he was different. He didn't have his father's love for the soil. He was a gentle, artistic soul, more interested in books and drawings than in tractors and livestock. He was a kind, good-hearted boy, but he hated the harsh realities of farm life. He hated conflict, hated struggle. He just wanted things to be easy, to be pleasant. Frank worried about him. "The boy's got soft hands," he'd say, but I adored his gentle nature. I thought it was a sign of his deep soul. I never imagined his desperate need for an easy life would one day lead him to betray the very land that had raised him. When my Frank passed away from a massive heart attack 7 years ago, right in the middle of harvest season, the world stopped turning. The land felt silent, empty. My strong, capable husband was gone, and I was left, at 74, to manage a farm and a grief so vast it felt like its own empty field. Samuel was my rock. He took a leave of absence from his job as a librarian in Chicago and came home for 3 months. He was so good to me. He handled the funeral arrangements. He helped me hire a farm manager to keep things running. He was a kind, dutiful son. And it was in this haze of grief, when I was at my most vulnerable, that I made the decision that would become the loaded gun in a future fight. I went to our local lawyer and, to simplify my estate, I added Samuel's name to the deed of the farm. A joint tenancy. It was an act of love, a symbol of continuity. I thought I was honoring Frank's wish to keep the land in the family. I had no idea I was giving the fox a key to the henhouse. A year later, Samuel met Victoria. He brought her to the farm for a weekend, and I was so ready to love the woman who had captured my son's heart. Victoria was breathtaking. She was a successful real estate agent from the city, a woman who crackled with energy and ambition. She was beautiful, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a smile that could disarm a hostile army. She was everything my gentle, passive son was not. She was a master of charm. She arrived wearing brand new, expensive-looking boots, professing a deep, undiscovered love for the countryside. She raved about the fresh air, the beautiful scenery. She insisted on helping me in the kitchen, asking for my canning recipes. She walked the fields with Samuel, listening with what appeared to be rapt attention as he pointed out the landmarks of his childhood. "Lillian," she said to me that weekend, her voice a symphony of sincerity, "you and Frank have built something incredible here, a legacy. It's so real, so authentic. It's a tragedy that so few people get to experience this kind of life anymore. Samuel is so lucky to have these roots." I was completely, utterly won over. I, a woman who had spent her life dealing with straightforward, honest farm folk, was no match for her sophisticated, city-bred charm. I thought she was a strong, wonderful woman who would build a beautiful life with my son. I didn't recognize the cold, appraising look in her eyes as she scanned the horizon. I thought she was admiring the view. I now know she was calculating the acreage. They married 6 months later. And then, about 3 years ago, the carefully planned crisis arrived. They came to me one weekend, their faces etched with worry and sadness. Victoria, they explained, had a bout of illness related to the stress of the city. Her doctor had recommended a quieter, more peaceful environment. And Samuel had been laid off from his library job due to budget cuts. They were in financial trouble. "Mom," Samuel said, his voice thick with shame, "we don't know what to do. And Victoria's health, we were thinking. What if we moved back here? Just for a year. Just until we get back on our feet and Victoria is feeling strong again. We could help you with the farm. It's too much for you to handle alone. It's too much for you to handle alone." It was a perfect story, a beautiful blend of crisis, health concerns, and filial duty. My son and his sick wife needed me. The farm needed them. How could I say no? I opened my home, my land, my heart to them. The first 6 months were a performance of idyllic family life. Victoria, now the recovering invalid, would sit on the porch reading while I did the cooking and cleaning. She was too fragile for housework, but she was full of ideas for improving the farm. She and Samuel, my son who had always hated the farm, were suddenly full of plans. They started by redecorating the house. My comfortable, worn farmhouse furniture was old and depressing. It was replaced, piece by piece, with sleek minimalist furniture that looked like it belonged in a city loft. The house began to feel cold, unfamiliar. It was no longer my home. It was becoming their showpiece. Then, they turned their attention to the land itself. "Lillian," Victoria would say, her voice full of a bright, visionary energy, "this farm has so much potential, but it's being underutilized. We're sitting on a gold mine here." She started talking in a language I didn't understand. Words like rezoning, subdividing, development, opportunities. She would walk the property with her phone, taking pictures, talking to people I didn't know. My son, my Samuel, would trail along behind her, a look of awe on his face. He was captivated by her vision, by her promises of an easy, wealthy life. He had forgotten his father's creed. He was no longer thinking about leaving the land better than he found it. He was thinking about how to liquidate it for the highest possible price. I felt a growing dread, a sense of being a stranger on my own land. But whenever I tried to express my concerns, they would turn it back on me. "Mom, you're just being sentimental," Samuel would say. "Victoria has a brilliant business mind. She's talking about securing our family's future. Your future. Your future is in this land, Samuel, not in selling it off piece by piece." Victoria would intervene, her voice smooth and reasonable. "Lillian, we respect your emotional attachment to the farm. We truly do. But the reality is, it's a huge financial burden. The property taxes, the upkeep, selling off a small unused parcel could provide enough money to keep the rest of the farm running for years, and to make sure you have the best care as you get older." She was so reasonable, so logical. She made my love for my home, my husband's legacy, sound like a childish, financially irresponsible whim. She made me feel foolish. She made me doubt myself. The final, brilliant deception came about 2 years ago. They sat me down at the kitchen table. Victoria had a thick stack of documents, prepared by a lawyer who was a friend of hers from the city. "Lillian," she said, her expression a perfect mask of loving concern. "We've been working on a plan to protect the farm, an estate plan. It's very complicated, all about trusts and tax shelters to make sure the government doesn't take half the value of the land when you pass. It will protect the farm for Samuel and for his children. It's what Frank would have wanted. It's what Frank would have wanted." She was using my husband's name, my love for my future grandchildren, to sell me on my own destruction. "All you need to do," she said, pushing the stack of papers and a pen towards me, "is sign here, 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 and here." I looked at the papers. They were full of dense, legal language I couldn't understand. I looked at my son. He was smiling, a look of genuine relief on his face. He believed this was the right thing to do. He believed they were protecting me, protecting the farm. I picked up the pen. My hand was shaking. Something felt wrong. Cold, deep unease settled in my gut. It was my Frank's voice, whispering in my memory from across the years. "Read what you sign, Lily. Never trust a smiling salesman." But my own son was smiling at me. My daughter-in-law was looking at me with such care. To refuse, to question them, would be to accuse them of something terrible. It would cause a fight. And my son hated fighting. So I started to sign. I signed the documents for the trust. I signed the power of attorney. My hand grew tired. The pages blurred. And then I came to the last document. It looked different. It was a single page. A deed of transfer. It would transfer my sole ownership to a new entity, a trust that she and Samuel controlled. I hesitated. The cold feeling in my gut intensified. "My hand is cramping," I said, my voice thin and frail. I put the pen down. "I'm so tired. I'll sign the last one later." Victoria's smile tightened for a fraction of a second. "Of course, Lillian. Rest up. We can finish it tomorrow." She gathered the stack of papers, her movements brisk and efficient. She was so sure of her victory, so confident in my weakness, so blinded by her own cleverness, that she didn't check. She didn't look to see that the most important signature was missing. She just took the stack of papers, believing she had it all. I had not been strong. I had not been brave. I had been a coward. I hadn't refused to sign. I had just postponed it. But in that small, quiet act of hesitation, that one moment of listening to the ghost of my husband instead of the voice of my son, I had unknowingly saved myself. I had left one last lock on the door of the fortress, and they had no idea. The day after I failed to sign that final piece of paper was the first day of my new life, the life of a ghost on my own land. I didn't say a word about the unsigned deed. My cowardice, my inability to confront them directly, had accidentally become my greatest strategic advantage. They believed they had total control. They believed the fortress was theirs. And in their arrogance, they stopped paying attention to the quiet old woman who they thought was now just a powerless tenant. Life in the house changed. The last vestiges of a family arrangement disappeared. I was, in their eyes, a problem that had been legally and financially solved. I was a dependent, a piece of living furniture they had to maintain until they could move me to a more suitable facility. My opinions were no longer sought, even for show. My presence was tolerated, but not welcomed. Victoria immediately began to operate as the new queen of the farm. She was on the phone constantly, her voice a sharp, confident buzz of business terms. She had surveyors come out to walk the property, driving stakes with bright plastic ribbons into the fields my husband had plowed for 50 years. Each stake felt like a nail being driven into my heart. She was carving up my life into sellable lots. My son, Samuel, was her enthusiastic lieutenant. The boy who had hated the dirt under his fingernails now walked the land with an air of ownership, pointing things out to the men in suits, his face alight with the promise of easy money. He had transformed. The gentle, artistic soul was gone, replaced by a man I didn't recognize, a man whose eyes held the cold gleam of a developer, not a farmer. He was no longer the son of this land. He was its liquidator. They started to make improvements to the house, not for comfort, but for resale value. A new roof, new windows, a new coat of paint on the barn. All of it was paid for from the consolidated accounts, from my money. I would watch the work crews arrive, and I would feel a sense of profound and bitter irony. They were using my husband's life savings to dress up his legacy for the slaughter. My life became a quiet, watchful resistance. I couldn't fight them openly. They had all the power, all the documents, or so they thought. So I fought them in the only way I could, with silence, with observation, and with memory. I started keeping a journal. Every night, I would write down everything I had seen that day. The name of the surveying company on the side of the truck. The snippets of conversation I heard about zoning variances and septic system requirements. The license plate numbers of the strange cars that came and went. I was building a case even though I didn't know what I would do with it. It was an act of bearing witness to the dismantling of my own life. The emotional toll was immense. I felt like I was living in a constant state of grief, not just for my dead husband, but for my living son. I would look at him across the dinner table, laughing with his wife about the killing they were going to make on Lot B, and I would see the ghost of the little boy who used to bring me wildflowers from the fields they were now planning to pave over. The loss of him was a sharper, more constant pain than the loss of Frank had ever been. Frank was gone, but Samuel was there, a stranger wearing my son's face. The isolation was the hardest part. My 2 daughters would call. "How are things, Mom? Isn't it wonderful having Samuel and Victoria there to help you?" What could I say? I couldn't tell them the truth. It was too shameful. It would have sounded like the paranoid ramblings of a bitter old woman. So I would lie. "It's wonderful, dear," I'd say. "They are such a big help." Every lie was a small betrayal of myself, and it ate away at my soul. Victoria's cruelty was not loud or aggressive. It was the quiet, condescending cruelty of a person who believes they are dealing with an inferior intellect. She would explain things to me in a slow, loud voice, as if I were hard of hearing and simple-minded. "Now, Lillian," she'd say, "this man is a soil engineer. He is here to test the dick grounding for the new houses is." She would control my life with a velvet glove. She suggested I should no longer drive my old pickup truck. "It's not safe for you, Lillian. Your reaction times aren't what they used to be." She didn't take my keys. She just took the truck to a mechanic in the city for a tune-up, and it never came back. I was stranded, completely dependent on her for transportation. My quiet resistance sometimes took the form of small acts of sabotage. The surveyors would leave their wooden stakes in the ground, and in the dead of night, I would go out and move them. Just a few feet. It was a petty, childish act, but it was mine. It would cause confusion and delays. They would blame it on local kids, never suspecting the quiet old woman they had locked away. I also began to reconnect with my community, in secret. I bought a cheap, prepaid cell phone on a trip to town with a friend from church. I started calling old neighbors, people who had known my family for generations. I wouldn't tell them what was happening. I would just ask questions. About land use. About water rights. About the old county laws Frank used to talk about. I was gathering knowledge. I was arming myself. The final phase of their plan began about a year ago. Victoria announced she had found a buyer. Not for a small parcel, but for the entire farm. The house, the barn, all 150 acres. A developer from the city who wanted to turn Frank's legacy into a golf course and a gated community of luxury homes. "It's a spectacular offer, Lillian," she said, her eyes shining with a light I can only describe as avaricious. "It's more money than you could ever have dreamed of. It will set this family up for generations. We'll buy a beautiful new house in the city, and we'll find a wonderful, top-of-the-line facility for you, with round-the-clock care. You'll be so comfortable." They were going to sell my home, my world, and use the proceeds to put me in a home. The perfect, elegant solution to the problem of the inconvenient old mother. My son sat beside her, his face a mixture of excitement and a deep, buried shame. He knew this was a betrayal of everything his father had stood for. He knew it was a desecration. But the lure of a life without struggle, a life of wealth and ease, was too strong for his soft hands and his gentle soul. He had chosen the easy road, and it led directly over his mother's heart and his father's grave. The weeks leading up to the sale were a blur of activity. The house was filled with strangers, appraisers, engineers, lawyers. I was a ghost, drifting through the rooms, watching them measure and photograph my life for sale. Victoria was in her element, a whirlwind of phone calls and documents, a brilliant, terrifying general on the verge of her greatest victory. She treated me with a new kind of dismissive kindness, the kindness of a winner. She would pat my arm and say things like, "Don't you worry your pretty little head about any of this, Lillian. It's all being handled." She was so sure of herself, so utterly, arrogantly confident that she had won. She had the signed trust documents. She had the signed power of attorney. She had my son's signature on the sale agreement. She had a buyer with a certified check. She had everything. Everything except for one single, lonely signature on a piece of paper she had forgotten about 2 years ago. A piece of paper that was tucked away in a file in her own office. A ticking time bomb she didn't even know existed. The night before the closing, the house was filled with a strange, celebratory atmosphere. Victoria and Samuel opened a bottle of expensive champagne. They toasted to their new life, to their brilliant future. They were laughing, happy. They didn't even notice me, sitting in my corner, watching them. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I felt a profound, cold calm. The calm of a farmer who has watched the sky for days, has felt the shift in the wind, and knows, with absolute certainty, that the storm is about to break. The next morning, they dressed in their finest city clothes. They looked like strangers in my farmhouse kitchen. "Well, Lillian," Victoria said, her smile wide and triumphant. "This is the big day, the end of an era and the beginning of a new one. By this afternoon, we'll be millionaires." She paused, looking at me with a flicker of what might have been pity. "Don't look so sad. We'll find a very nice place for you. You'll be comfortable." "I'm sure you will," I said, my voice quiet. They left for the lawyer's office in the city, the place where the final papers were to be signed. They were radiant with victory. I did not go with them. I stayed home. I put on a pot of coffee. I walked out onto my front porch, the porch Frank had built for me, and I sat in my rocking chair. I looked out over the fields, my fields, and I waited. I knew the storm was about to hit. I just didn't know how loud the thunder would be. The phone call came 2 hours later. It was Samuel. But his voice was not the voice of a triumphant millionaire. It was the voice of a man who had just seen the world fall out from under his feet. It was a thin, strangled, panicked whisper. "Mom," he said. "Mom, what happened? What did you do?" I sat on my porch, the old wood groaning comfortably beneath my rocking chair, and held the phone to my ear. I could hear the chaos on the other end of the line, my son's panicked breathing, the sharp, hysterical sound of Victoria's voice in the background. "What did I do, Samuel?" I asked, and my voice was as calm as the morning air. "I didn't do anything. I just sat here and drank my coffee. What happened?" "The deed," he stammered, his voice cracking. The final transfer of title. The lawyer, the buyer's lawyer, he said, it's not valid. He said your name was never removed as sole owner. He said you never signed the last page. The silence on my end of the line was my answer. I let him sit with it. I let him replay the memory of that day 2 years ago, the day his wife was so sure of her victory that she hadn't bothered to check the paperwork, the day I had been too tired to sign one last time. But that's impossible, he sputtered. Victoria had all the papers. We signed a trust. We have power of attorney. You have a lovely, complicated trust that doesn't own this land, Samuel, I said, my voice still quiet, still calm. You have the power to make decisions for an old woman who, it turns out, still owns her own farm. You built a beautiful, elaborate cage, but you forgot to make sure the bird was inside it before you shut the door. I heard a shriek of pure rage in the background. It was Victoria. She grabbed the phone from him. You old witch, she screamed into the phone, her voice stripped of all its charm and sophistication. You did this on purpose. You tricked us. No, Victoria, I replied, and I almost felt a flicker of pity for her. She, the master manipulator, had been defeated by a simple, quiet act of hesitation. You tricked yourselves. You were so busy admiring your own cleverness that you didn't pay attention to the details. My husband, Frank, was a simple man, but he taught me one thing. The most important work is in the foundation. And your foundation was built on a lie. You assumed I was a fool. You assumed I was weak. And you assumed I had signed every paper you put in front of me. You were wrong. We'll sue you, she shrieked. We'll take you to court. We'll prove you're incompetent. We'll take this farm. You do that, I said, and the calm in my voice was the most powerful weapon I had ever wielded. You take me to court. You stand up in front of a judge and explain why you believe a woman who had the presence of mind to protect her own property is mentally incompetent. You explain to him why the money from my accounts was used to buy your luxury car. You explain the plan to sell my home and put me in a facility. Please, Victoria, I would very much enjoy watching you make that case. My lawyer is waiting for your call. The line went silent. I could hear her sputtering, choking on her own fury. She was a shark, but I had just pulled her out of the water and left her flapping on the dry, solid land of my legal ownership. She had no moves left. She had been outmaneuvered, not by a brilliant legal mind, but by a simple old farm woman and a single, missing signature. You have 1 week to remove yourselves and all of your belongings from my property, I said, my voice as hard and unyielding as the winter ground. If you are not gone by then, I will have the sheriff escort you off my land. We are done here. I hung up the phone. I didn't slam it down. I placed it gently back on the table beside my rocking chair. I took a sip of my coffee. The battle was over. The quietest war of my life, and I had won it without ever raising my voice. The week that followed was a strange, silent storm. They returned to the house that afternoon, but they were not the same people who had left. The triumphant, arrogant couple was gone. In their place were 2 bitter, defeated ghosts, haunting the rooms that were no longer theirs. Victoria was a viper, spitting venom. She didn't speak to me, but I could hear her on the phone with her lawyer, her friends, her mother, her voice a constant, shrill monologue of rage and disbelief. She was the victim. I was the conniving, manipulative old woman who had cheated her out of her brilliant future. She never once, in all of her tirades, acknowledged the truth, that she had tried to steal my home and had failed. Samuel, my son, was a different kind of ghost. He was a ghost of shame. He was utterly broken. The grand vision his wife had sold him, the life of ease and wealth, had vanished in an instant, revealed to be a fragile mirage. He had betrayed his father's legacy, he had betrayed his mother's love, and he had done it for nothing. He avoided me completely. I would catch a glimpse of him sometimes, packing boxes, his shoulders slumped, his face pale and empty. He looked like a man who had lost his soul, and I knew, with a mother's painful certainty, that he had. They didn't speak to each other. The silence between them was thick with blame and resentment. The powerful, dynamic team had been shattered. Their partnership revealed to be nothing more than a shared greed, which now had nothing to feed on. I stayed out of their way. I spent my days on the porch or walking the fields. My fields. I felt the land under my feet, solid, real. It was mine. The feeling was a quiet, powerful joy. I had held on. I had weathered their storm. On the 7th day, a moving truck arrived. It was a much smaller truck than the one they had moved in with. There was less to take out. The sleek, modern furniture that Victoria had bought with my money, she now had to sell online at a loss to pay for the move. The cycle of her life, I thought, was one of acquiring and liquidating. She had just tried to do it with my farm. I watched them from the porch as they loaded the last of their boxes. Victoria shot me a look of pure, concentrated hatred. If looks could kill, I would have been struck dead on my rocking chair. I had just met her gaze, my expression calm, and I gave her a small, polite nod. It was the nod of a landowner to a departing tenant. It was the final, quiet assertion of my victory. It drove her mad. Samuel was the last to leave. He walked to the edge of the porch, but he didn't step onto it. He stood on the ground, looking up at me. He looked old, and so very tired. "Mom," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "I am sorry." I looked at my son, the boy I had loved, the man who had broken my heart. And I felt a great, deep sadness. Not for me, but for him. For the weakness that had allowed him to be so easily led, for the moral compass he had so willingly discarded for the promise of a life he hadn't earned. "I know, Samuel," I said. And that was all. There was nothing else to say. Forgiveness was a country I was not yet ready to visit. He turned and got in the truck with his wife. I watched them drive down the long lane, past the fields and the old oak tree, until they were just a speck of dust on the horizon. And then they were gone. The silence that descended on the farm was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was a clean silence, a peaceful silence. It was my silence. I never heard from them again. My daughters told me, months later, that their marriage had not survived. Their partnership, built on a shared dream of unearned wealth, could not survive the reality of failure. He works in a bookstore now, in a small town a few states away. She, I believe, is selling real estate somewhere else. They have scattered like seeds in the wind. I have my farm back. I have my home. I called my daughters, and I told them the whole truth. They were shocked, then furious, then deeply, deeply supportive. They come to visit often now, with my other grandchildren. The house is filled with real laughter again. I hired a new farm manager, a young man with a family who loves the land as much as Frank did. I sit on the porch, and I watch him work, and I feel a sense of peace. What did I learn from all of this? I learned that weakness can sometimes be a kind of strength. My inability to confront them, my simple act of being too tired to sign a paper, became the weapon that saved me. I learned that you must always listen to the ghosts of the people who loved you. My husband's voice, his quiet wisdom, was what saved me. He was gone, but his love was still here, a fortress around my heart. And I learned that this land, this soil, is more than just a financial asset to be bought and sold. It is a legacy. It is a story. It is a responsibility. You don't just own it. You are a part of it. And it is a part of you. My son forgot that. And in forgetting it, he lost himself. So if you are out there, and you feel that you are being outmaneuvered by people who are smarter, faster, and more ruthless than you are, remember my story. Be quiet. Be patient. Watch. And never, ever underestimate the power of a single, unsigned piece of paper. Thank you for sitting with me on my porch and listening to my story. Your quiet company has been a great comfort. If my story has resonated with you, I would be so grateful if you would like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell. In the comments below, please feel to share a story about a time when a small, quiet act had a big, powerful consequence in your life. Love you all. This is Grandma Lillian, and I'll see you in the next story.